Hey, what's up guys, it's Matt with the Movement System. In this video, we're going to talk about strength conditioning for basketball, and we're going to break down a full training session and talk about each exercise. Big shout out to Ben Adina, who's a trainer here in Las Vegas working with basketball athletes. He let me film a session while he's working with Damian and Sydney, and I'll link to all three of their Instagrams below if you want to learn more about what they're doing. So we're going to take a look at Sydney and Damian's training, and to lay the groundwork, they're both training for college basketball. These training sessions were from August before they returned back to train with their teams. It's really cool that they were able to travel to Las Vegas because I know some basketball players are afraid of traveling. I know what you're thinking, Matt, are you really going to do the pun thing for this entire video? Shoot. So to start off, let's take a look at their dynamic warm-up. So for the dynamic warm-up, we can do different exercises starting with just a basic jog and then moving into something more dynamic like a lunge or a backwards lunge. And then towards the end of the dynamic warm-up, that's when we typically get more specific with our movements. So we might do something like a shuffle or a karaoke to a vertical jump to start to work multi-directional. There's a lot of options for a dynamic warm-up. Don't overcomplicate it. We're just trying to get the body moving here. This is typically around 5-10 minutes at the start of the session, and then we get into the specific stuff like activation drills and plyometrics. Some activation drills that Ben had Sydney and Damian doing included a rolling pattern drill, which involved pushing a dumbbell up towards the ceiling and essentially just rolling the lower body. Also things like skipping patterns to work on locomotion and technique. And then this band step over drill, which I thought was really interesting. We're working the hip abductor on the side that the band is pulling the knee in. So we actually have to use the glute med and other hip abduction muscles to keep that knee in line with the foot. And then the other leg is actually getting a nice dynamic warm up, stepping up and over the band. I think using hurdles, if you have them, can actually make a really good warm up drill. Some athletes may not like doing hurdles, but they'll get over it. All right, and then after our activation drills, that's when we get into the fun stuff like the plyometrics. These we're typically doing pretty early in a training session to get the most power and rate of force development. If we wait too long into the training session, it's not going to be as effective because voluntary activation of your muscles does reduce as we get more fatigued throughout a training session. So we're typically doing things like plyometrics pretty early. Some of the plyometrics that Damian was doing included a drop jump to a lateral jump. Now this is a fairly advanced exercise. Remember, this is pretty late in the off season. Damian probably started with more basic movements months ago and progressed up to a drill like this. Some cues that Ben is using here is to really push off the ground, make a bigger jump here, as well as stick the landing on that leg. If we can make these movements faster with shorter ground contact time, smaller joint excursion, we can make athletes more powerful and explosive off of one leg, and that's going to translate to basketball specific moves. An interesting plyometric drill that Sydney was doing in her training session was actually a med ball rotational throw. So Ben was kind of set up on a box here and then dropping that ball at an angle, and then Sydney's actually absorbing that force, not just through the trunk, but also through the legs to rotate and throw it back very forcefully. This is a good time to point out there's no one best plyometric exercise for basketball. Ben uses a ton of different plyometric exercises at different phases throughout the season, as well as different days throughout his training week. Everyone can have a different breakdown for how they set up a training week. One way that Ben was doing it was, for example, on Monday, doing lateral power with vertical strength. On Wednesday, doing linear power with strength. And then on Friday, going to vertical power with lateral strength. This is just one example of how to break down a training week. This will be different for different athletes, so you have to figure out what's going to work best for you. Moving through the training session though, we next would come up to something like agility or change of direction. Damian was doing an agility drill that actually involved a reactive component here with 3 cones. So what you can see here is he's actually reacting to Ben's cue to move one way or the other and then returning to that start position. This is actually a really similar technique to what I use whenever I see an open squat rack across the gym at 5 p.m. on a Monday. Another change of direction drill that Damian was doing involved 4 boxes and essentially planting a foot into each box and forcefully returning to the start position. This is a really good drill to work on powerfully pushing through the ground and changing direction. This is pre-planned, so there's no reactive component to it. You probably want in your program some combination of agility and reactive, and then also some pre-planned work that's more specific to change of direction. Again, there's a lot of options for agility and change of direction drills, so you just have to figure out what's an appropriate progression from what you're doing now towards where you want to go to improve your sport. After doing plyometrics and change of direction drills, we're probably going to move into some strength work. Again, this will depend on the type of training session that you're doing and your athlete's needs, but some strength drills that Ben was programming here included things like a dead bug exercise with a cable for resistance. This is really great for working the anterior core as well as incorporating the lats here. A couple of strength exercises that Sydney was doing was a bird dog row off of the bench. This is going to work on stability as well as a little bit of a strength stimulus. But really for building strength in this session, Sydney was working the lat pull down exercise. And then another strength exercise that Sydney was doing was a hamstring slider. This is a really challenging exercise to maintain a full hip extension for the hip bridge and then to go into that eccentric lengthening and then shortening phase to work the hamstrings. Toward the end of the training session is where Ben was programming some speed and conditioning work. For Sydney, that involved resisted sprints. So not a ton of weight on the sled. Actually, earlier in the off season, he said he was doing more weight on the sled, but as she was approaching the season, he was taking weight off the sled and making these a little bit less resisted and more speed focused. Depending on how you load these and how much rest you give, you can make this more of a conditioning stimulus or more of a speed stimulus. So doing it with lightweight, fast, with enough rest is going to make it more of a speed stimulus, but doing something like a repeated sled push with heavier weight might be more of a muscular conditioning stimulus. For that muscular conditioning stimulus with a heavier sled, we could actually see the lateral sled drag exercise here. That exercise is going to work a combination of the obliques as well as the lower body here to provide some lateral strength and conditioning. Some other options for conditioning and strength include an offset march where you're holding one dumbbell overhead and then one dumbbell by the side and then focusing on a march forward. This is a great exercise for core stability as well as conditioning. And then lastly, you can see an explosive med ball sit up here, again for the anterior core musculature here, more of a conditioning exercise towards the end of a training session. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure you smash the like button. And if you want to learn more, check out the Movement System podcast. I did an entire episode with Ben about strength conditioning for basketball. So if you want to learn more about strength conditioning for basketball, search the Movement System podcast on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts and queue up this episode for your next workout or car ride. Thanks so much for listening, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.